Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, July 27th, 2017. One more try on our brand new broadcasting apparatus here. I think we got the sound levels more or less stabilized yesterday. What should we talk about today? I don't know. Well, the zombie treason care bill, such as it is, I'm not even certain I can call it a bill. I don't know what to call this thing. It's not health care, it's not a bill, it's not anything. The process continues to work itself out on the Senate floor. We can certainly cover that. Or if you choose, you can be distracted by the morning's drama out of the White House. I guess the new communications director, that's what they're calling him, right? Anthony Scaramucci. Do I actually have that name right? I don't think I've even really had to say it out loud until now. Has embroiled himself in a bit of controversy as well. I don't know if it's so much controversy as it is just plain old walking around being like an idiot. If I understand things correctly, a Politico columnist or Politico reporter managed to get a hold of his financial disclosure form, which he filed in connection with a job he's held for a short while, I think in the Export-Import Bank, before moving over to the White House. And they published it, and or parts of it, or some report from it, and it's I guess suspected, Scaramucci I guess suspects that he's in some sort of turf battle with Reince Priebus, and that Reince leaked the information somehow to damage Scaramucci in his bid for I don't know what. Although I have seen it tweeted that there are rumors that Scaramucci is somehow, like Jon Snow, being groomed for command. He's going to push Priebus out of the White House Chief of Staff job from the communications director perch somehow. It's entirely possible. Anything could happen in this White House. But I guess he suspected that he was the one that leaked this information. And I am a little bit baffled, as is the rest of the world, as to how he could come to think something like this. And he last night tweeted, and I didn't save the tweet because, as you know, and as a matter of full transparency, Scaramucci told everybody, I am deleting old tweets that put me in opposition to the president or White House policy, because I now serve the White House, and that's that. And I don't know whether I can say I respect that decision per se, but I can respect the idea that, okay, well, going forward, my job is this, and that's what I'm going to do. And I had these personal views. I would live up to them, but Scaramucci thinks otherwise and says, in the interest of full transparency, I'm deleting my old tweets, by the way. Now, of course, he's deleting current tweets, including the tweet last night in which he seemed to be threatening somebody, leakers of all kinds. And though for some reason he called out Reince Priebus by tagging him in the tweet for some reason. Maybe he just wanted the White House Chief of Staff to be aware of these horrible, horrible issues that they've been having. I don't really know what his motivation was, but at any rate, he was wanting to involve the FBI somehow in the investigation of this so-called leak. In other words, as I said last night, he's calling, hello, FBI, my disclosure has been disclosed. It's a financial disclosure form. It's designed to be disclosed to the public. There is a process, of course, by which these things are made available to the public, and it's not, I guess, necessarily the case, or really at all, the case that the moment you file them, they're public, although really it ought to be, but I suppose they built in, I don't know whether they built in some sort of grace period for revisions in case of mistakes, although really, honestly, the whole point of the thing and signing it is supposed to be to live up to your mistakes if you make them. But whatever. Anyway, bottom line is that the thing was well past its 30 days and available for publication, and he looks like an idiot. And I believe at some point he made a point of telling everybody, hey, I went to Harvard Law School. I mean, I went too. I walked right past it one day on my way to Starbucks, but I don't know who knows what it means in this administration to have gone to Harvard Law School. Besides which, he's not the only one in the administration or serving the administration who's gone to Harvard Law School and has proved an idiot at some point. But it's hard to avoid. If the moment you say, yes, I'll work in your administration, I think it's all down the toilet. Anyway, that's where we are. And it turns out he deleted that tweet from last night, I guess because it's embarrassing. So full transparency, if I embarrass myself, I will delete that tweet. Okay. And now I find out that Anthony Scaramucci is following my Twitter account, although if I could take a stab at guessing, I would imagine that Anthony Scaramucci is probably following hundreds of thousands of people. Yes, 100 of thousands of people, and well on his way to a second 100 of thousands, 167,000. I guess anybody who mentions him probably ends up following. I don't know how people who do that, how they manage their feeds. I guess they just follow certain lists instead. I'm technically following you, but I never see what you say. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, I very quickly realized in tweeting that he was deleting current tweets. I now realize that under the Anthony Scaramucci definition, that too was a leak, and I should expect a call from the FBI any moment. Although, of course, it would be entirely illegal to use the FBI in this fashion. But maybe he was absent from Harvard Law School that day. I don't know. It doesn't make much of a difference, but we're ready to roll with our show today. Daily Kos Radio, as you can hear for yourself right now, and that's not even a leak, is live. If you have failed to listen, as we are reminded by Bill in Portland, Maine, Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, will threaten to take away your federal grants. And I might as well, because that's in the offing. It was pointed out to me this morning, as I was reading the news, or just getting my first inkling of the news, that the Trump administration was now leveling threats at Senator Lisa Murkowski for her failure to get on board the Trump train with zombie treason care, was now threatening various federal programs and federal grants that were targeted for her very needy state of Alaska. And as Michael Musson pointed out this morning, when the Trump administration threatens Alaska funding because Senator Murkowski voted no on health care votes, though it wasn't really a health care vote, you understand, he forgets that they can't alienate Senator Sullivan. As it turns out, there is a Senator Sullivan among our United States Senate. I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but as it turns out, there is such a person. He represents Alaska, which, true, was formerly the property of Russia, but it's been some time now, and we generally consider it to be American territory, although, who knows, I haven't spoken to Vladimir Putin anytime soon, and as we know, the clown princess of Alaska, Sarah Palin, was constantly worried about Putin rearing his head up there. And who do you think is in charge of doing anything about that? And oh my God, we just found out who was in charge at the time. And I can't believe that Alaska isn't Russian at this point. But somehow she managed, with no doubt the help of the Obama administration, to keep the territory of Alaska within America's boundaries. But we're reminded that there is a Senator Sullivan, and you can't afford to alienate him. I'll tell you what, the fact that we haven't called his name once in the zombie treason care debate probably should be taken as a pretty good indication that he's been a solid vote on almost everything, if not everything, literally everything, in this whole zombie Trump treason care process. And if you begin to punish his state because of what Senator Murkowski has done, he might be that stupid of a guy. I don't really know. I don't know nothing about him. He might be a genius, a secret genius Alaskan Republican senator I never heard of, who's just saving it up for some important event to be determined later. But, he's going to suffer, his state's going to suffer, and he's been as loyal as he could be, I think. I guess I should double check the record, but on the assumption that he's been there on every vote, or nearly every vote on zombie treason care. I really do try to avoid calling it health care. and then ends up seeing his state punished, I wonder how he'll react to that. But like I said, he could be dumb, and he might say, yeah, oh no, this thing that's happening that's terrible in Alaska isn't my fault. It's Murkowski's fault. It's not happening to my voters. It's happening to Murkowski's voters. And they're totally different people. He might actually genuinely believe this. For the serious reporting on the subject, I can grab this. I just saw Dan Diamond's tweet go by. Let's grab it and have a look. As you know, he is a Politico writer, and as you know, I had to check his Twitter profile to figure that out. If you're just waking up, he says, in a tweet that is being retweeted and liked in the sort of fashion that you see in TweetDeck of the slot machines with the numbers rolling constantly at the bottom here. If you're just waking up, incredible story about Trump White House reportedly threatening Alaska for Murkowski vote. And I'll click through to the incredible story, but for the moment I'll just content myself with the incredible excerpt from the story, deemed incredible by the fact that it has been screenshotted and embedded in this tweet. Early Wednesday, Trump took to Twitter. That's a tongue twister by itself. If it was Tuesday, I'd really be in trouble. Early Tuesday, Trump took to Twitter to express, it was Wednesday, displeasure with Murkowski's vote. See, I told you my tongue was going to be twisted. By that afternoon, each of Alaska's 2 Republican senators had received a phone call from Interior Secretary Ryan Zink. Is he say Zinke? Anybody know? Letting them know that how that vote had put Alaska's future with the administration in jeopardy. That's really rather amazing. But I wonder what that phone call is like in Sullivan's office. Like in Murkowski's office, I would imagine it's like, F you, click. Whereas in Sullivan's office, it was probably, what? F you? You know? I mean, it's totally different. Anyway, Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan said the call from Zinke, I think it's maybe Zinke, heralded a troubling message. He went out of his way for that one. I'm not going to go into the details, but I fear that the strong economic growth, pro-energy, pro-mining, pro-jobs, and personnel from Alaska. What? Pro-jobs and, I guess, is he saying he's pro-jobs and pro-personnel? I'm not even sure what this means. I'm not going to go into details, but I fear that the strong economic growth, got it, pro-energy, pro-mining, pro-jobs, and personnel from Alaska who are part of these policies are going to stop, Sullivan said. Well, that is word salad, but okay. That's Alaska for you, I guess. I don't know. I hate to tar the whole state with this, but I mean, it's a pretty low population state, and so you give me the examples of this guy, Sullivan, and Sarah Palin, and maybe even a couple of other Palins, too. And statistically speaking, that's fairly significant, considering that there's like 11 or 15 people in Alaska. Anyway, he goes on to say, I tried to push back on behalf of all Alaskans, everybody who would fit in the room anyway. We're facing some difficult times, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for the policies that Secretary Zinke and the President have been talking about with regard to our economy. But the message was pretty clear, Sullivan said. The Interior Secretary also contacted Murkowski. He said, we already knew that, but we wanted to give Sullivan a chance to tell everybody that. So there we are, folks. So that, kids, is why there are 2 senators from every state instead of just 1. It's actually part of the design so that you can't hold one over a barrel without insisting on holding both over a barrel. Now, there will be situations where it might benefit you politically, if you think you can get away with it, with holding both of them over the barrel. They may both have abandoned you on health care. They may now both abandon you on health care, although it doesn't sound a great deal like it, and it's not health care. But that's part of the design. And anytime you find yourself saying, yeah, this terrible thing that the administration did is part of the reason why there was this basic constitutional design put in place by the founders, that's an indication that you're looking at a constitutional crisis. If you have to resort to the founders, it's an early warning flag. Not by itself does it determine that there's a constitutional crisis, but it's a good indication. If you're having to dig out the original plan and say, why is this in here again? that you're not dealing with a necessarily commonly understood thing. I mean, ought to be commonly understood, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. I do think that there are a lot of people who sort of think that the government always runs this way. And there's a certain sense in which things do run this way, but the threats are considerably more subtle, and rarely does anybody believe that they'll rise to the point where action is taken, because generally speaking, the president is a person who, or is surrounded by people who understand that you can't just threaten entire state populations because you're angry with one of their citizens politically. It just doesn't really go like that. People think it does, and people like Trump think it does because they've been in private business, and I mean privately held business, all their lives, and they're accountable to no one, and they really can try their best to take revenge on people for entirely personal motives, and no one has the right to call them out on it or punish them in any way. And they can't be held to account in the legal system, generally speaking, unless they end up getting sued or countersued, as frequently happens with Donald Trump. So anyway, we should probably take a look at the entirety of that article and find out, I guess, at some point whether it's Ryan Zink or Ryan Zinke. No one wants to venture a guess? And by the way, if you tweet me and say it's Zinky, you're required to sing that. It's Zinky, it's Zinky. You know this song from, it was probably the 1970s advertisement. Fun, it's a wonderful toy. You know, no? Really? Okay. Well, anyway, it's fun for a girl and a boy, but you probably, and again, in this context, this administration, it's probably just something you want to stay away from. But he does walk downstairs alone or in pairs. I have seen him do that. So we're on the right track here. Okay. Let's see. Look, Michael Musson has this, Scaramucci here saying, we have to find these leaks. FBI, can you investigate the White House? Trump, you're fired. Oh, Mad Hatter's groaning about Zinke already. Oh, come on. It's early in the morning. Let's see. What has Rebecca got here? Too bad rules don't matter anymore. She's quoting Matthew Miller. Oh my goodness. I have to look up everybody's bio. He's a partner at Via Novo. Now, I've seen Matthew Miller around all over the place. And I guess maybe in the media we've seen him on MSNBC, where he's a justice and security analyst. I see him all over Twitter because I never turn on MSNBC. Not because I don't like it, but because I never get a chance. And I don't even know what number it is on my DirecTV. Some of you probably know it by heart. But the good stuff usually makes it to me through other people's reports anyway. Matthew Miller pointing out, this is a violation of Department of Justice rules on contacts with the White House that were established to prevent political interference with investigations, which I imagine is the Scaramucci tip-off to his, as it says here in this tweet from Zeke Miller. I don't know if they're Matthew Miller and Zeke Miller related. I mean, Miller's a pretty common surname, but anyway, I guess you have to ask that. Scaramucci telling CNN he talked to Sessions about leaks, also to buddies in the FBI, even though that tweet has now been deleted. I guess he made some direct contacts, and Matthew Miller is reminding us, yeah, that's illegal because it used to lead to horrible, horrible abuses in the olden days, and that's why they changed the law. But hey, Rebecca knows rules don't really matter anymore, so what's the difference? Okay. Well, it's an interesting morning. Do we spend any more time on this? We should probably spend some time on the threats made against Murkowski. That seems considerably more worrisome than whether Anthony Scaramucci has any clue what he's doing or not. By the way, I mean, I hate to be so appearance-focused about this administration, but these people are weird-looking, and it bothers me. And it's rising to the level that I might have to report this again to Oliver Willis as evidence of the simulation. But Scaramucci is a strange-looking guy. Although also pointed out is he seems to be a little bit of a mini Trump clone. He doesn't look like Donald Trump per se, but he dresses he dresses in a fashion that I think is more impressive to Donald Trump. And I really think that's probably the reason that he replaced Sean Spicer. Spicer certainly had some Washington experience, not that it showed at all in his job performance, but Scaramucci is Wall Street, and he dresses Wall Street, and that makes a difference to Donald Trump, who constantly is saying that he's evaluating the performance of his communications team on TV. How do they look and act and sound on TV? It doesn't matter whether what they say is true, or rather, if it's too easy for the entire press corps to figure out that what they're saying isn't true. That doesn't bother him so much as how do they look when they say it. Scaramucci looks like what Trump thinks a smooth operator should look like. Doesn't matter that he can't speak or communicate in any effective way, but he looks like he can. And as you know, I think he has said he watches TV with the sound off quite frequently too. I don't think that that's really true. I think he watches it with the sound on all the time because he can't really figure out what's going on without it. And, his morning rage tweets are largely fueled by the audio feed of Fox and Friends. I think without the audio, he wouldn't know what to yell about. Anyway, we know he watches a lot of TV one way or the other, and that's important to him that his people look sharp, and Sean Spicer was a bit of a schlump in his view, although I don't know whether he knows the word schlump. Anyway, I think that's what has caused him to replace Spicer with Scaramucci, and so that shouldn't surprise us. But besides the point, I don't know how old Scaramucci is, but he looks like he's had a facelift to me. Again, not that that matters a great deal, but I don't think he's old enough to need one, so I think I might have made the wrong call here. But what I'm saying is his facial skin is just tight, like it's pulled over an Android frame or something. There's just something strange about his appearance to me. It's not disqualifying in any way, and it doesn't even really irritate me that much. I find it odd, as I find all of them odd. Anyway, like I said, I was going to go over to the meat of the story as broken in the tweets here this morning about the threats being leveled against Murkowski. The reporting is not, as it turns out, in fact, from Politico, although I'm sure they have a story on it by now. The story being pointed to by our previously mentioned Politico reporter is from the Alaska Dispatch News. So let's take a look. Trump administration signals that Murkowski's healthcare vote could have energy repercussions for Alaska. A reporter, Erica Martinson. Okay, we'll take a look. President Donald Trump isn't going to just let Senator Lisa Murkowski's no vote on Tuesday's healthcare motion go. Early Wednesday, Trump took to Twitter to express displeasure with Murkowski's vote. That'll happen with Trump. It doesn't happen with other presidents, on Twitter anyway. By that afternoon, each of Alaska's 2 Republican senators had received a phone call, and it's interesting that they even thought to reach out to both of them. That at least illustrates that they know that there's 2 and they'll both be affected. But rather than stopping and thinking, oh yeah, we'd be punishing Sullivan for loyalty, even as we punish Murkowski for disloyalty, that didn't stop them. They wanted to use collective punishment as leverage against Sullivan, which, whatever, in another context, violation of the Geneva Conventions, what have you, but it wouldn't necessarily apply here. I'm just saying in another context, by analogy, we could do that, and that might be interesting. And if for any reason our president were to stop in one of his international European trips in The Hague, I would say that would be okay for you to grab him and keep him and try him there, and let us know what you find. And you just hang on to him for a while, and we'll think it over and let you know what to do. All right, so by yesterday afternoon, each of Alaska's 2 Republican senators had received a phone call from Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, etc., letting them know that the vote had put Alaska's future with the administration in jeopardy. The response follows Trump's no-holds-barred style of governing, even when it comes to his own party. The holds would, of course, be the rule of law, but, it's so fun and quirky, we're going to call it no-holds-barred style of governing. Okay. It's his first strike of retaliation against Murkowski, however, despite her tendency to stray from the party line and the president's priorities. Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan said the call from Zinke heralded a troubling message. I'm not going to go into the details, but I fear that the strong, remember this quote, I fear that the strong economic growth, pro-energy, pro-mining, pro-jobs, and personnel from Alaska, gobbledygook, who are part of these policies are going to stop, Sullivan said. So I think what he's trying to say is I fear that we'll edit this for him. I fear that the strong economic growth, pro-energy, pro-mining, pro-jobs policies toward Alaska are going to stop. And the people who are going to suffer from this are personnel from Alaska. I mean, it's nonsense. But okay, I get the idea. I tried to push back on behalf of all Alaskans, but I couldn't find the words probably. I don't know, there's an ellipsis here. Maybe that's what he says. I tried to push back on behalf of all Alaskans, but I'm terrible at that. We're facing some difficult times, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for the policies that Secretary Zinke and the President have been talking about with regard to our economy. But the message was pretty clear, Sullivan said. The Interior Secretary also contacted Murkowski, he said. Gee whiz, thanks. Murkowski was not available for comment. Spokespeople from the White House and the Interior Department did not respond to inquiries, even though they're spokespeople. Sullivan said the Interior Secretary was clear that his message was in response to the no vote Murkowski cast Tuesday on the motion to proceed with debate on the House-passed health care legislation. Efforts and issues on the line include the nominations of Alaskans to interior posts, and I would imagine to any post anywhere. There's no real reason why Zinke should have delivered that message on behalf of Interior unless he was directed by the White House. And the White House would have been directing them either to make it administration-wide, or they might have said, well, what's the department that has the most going on in Alaska? And the answer is Interior, even though, of course, Alaska famous not only for its own exterior, but famous for being far to the edge of our exterior. But that's not what Interior means, so it's okay. And they said maybe you should call. Though really, I wouldn't be surprised if there were other calls from other cabinet secretaries to come. Although now that they've been busted, maybe those are put on hold. The calls are on hold. That's true. That's a good point. Okay. Efforts and issues on the line include nominations of Alaskans to interior posts, an effort to build a road out of King Cove through the Izembek National Wildlife Refuge, and future opportunities to drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Darn, I can't believe that'll be rejected. That's awful. And expand drilling in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, among other regulatory issues that are a priority for Murkowski and Sullivan. What a tragedy if they were prohibited from future drilling opportunities in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge as a result of Lisa Murkowski's horrible, horrible treason. Sullivan said he had discussed the calls with Murkowski, and his concerns remain. Murkowski and Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins voted at odds with their fellow Republicans on Tuesday to begin floor debate on legislation to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, even though that's not what was really coming out of it. The vote was on the House-passed health care bill rather than the Senate legislation that has faltered in fits and starts in recent weeks. Murkowski said she felt the effort was rushed and did not adhere to an open and transparent legislative process. Didn't. Much remains unknown. How far the White House will go to punish or pressure Murkowski, what exactly the impact will be for Alaska, and just how this will play out. Murkowski, also, by the way, what's in the bill, but that's neither here nor there. Murkowski chairs the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, maybe that was the reason they sent Interior, and has used the position to drive home Alaska priorities, particularly with Interior nominees. Okay. She oversees the confirmation process for the Interior Department. On Wednesday, a committee here, which, by the way, brings us to another point. Is that wise for the Interior Secretary to call the chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee and threaten Alaska? Will the chair of that committee say, I guess I'll give in? Or will they say, well, from my position as chair of the committee that oversees the Interior Department, maybe I will nail your balls to the wall instead. That's a possibility. I have a nail gun, and I'm not afraid to use it. Well, maybe she is. We'll find out. On Wednesday, a committee hearing on nominations to the Interior and Energy Departments was postponed indefinitely. A reason was not posted. So it's up to you to guess. Was she afraid to go ahead because she thought that were there Alaskans on the agenda for nominations to Interior, and she thought that their nominations really were in jeopardy? Or was it just a bunch of people from all over the country, and she's the one doing the canceling to put the fear of God in Zinke? Don't know yet. For her part, I guess we could look at the postponement and try and find out. Actually, a rather simple thing to do since it's linked. Let's open it up in a new tab and take a look at it after this. For her part, Murkowski said Tuesday that she was not deeply concerned, about pushback from Alaska Republicans about her vote. Susan Collins was deeply concerned, though. We don't know if Collins got any threat, but when she heard about the threat leveled against Murkowski, she said she was deeply concerned because they're friends. What are you laughing at? I base my votes on what I believe is in Alaska's best interest, she said, so I know that there are those who wish that I would be more in line with following the party platform, but I don't think it should come as any surprise that there have been occasions that I have not followed the lead of the party. Trump has shown a willingness to go after members of his own party, and I need to remember that, when they go against his preferred agenda, an unusual presidential tactic. That's true, it is unusual, and they should remember that he has shown this willingness. He's not just Murkowski. He was really grilling Dean Heller at one point, too, when it looked like he might be a holdout. And of course, I think the job was finished by, is it Steve Wynn, the hotel magnate, and the various hotel and casino billionaires in Las Vegas. I wonder if that rubs Trump the wrong way or if that irritates him in any fashion, that there are casino billionaires in the world. Like, somebody made money on casinos? I don't even understand how that's done. I had heard originally that there was easy money in casinos, and it just didn't pan out. But I figured that's because it was casinos that sucked. I don't know. I'm sure he excuses himself from that one. And he made out like a bandit anyway, personally, so I guess he's not too upset about these things. Anyway, they apparently changed Dean Heller's mind, and he fell in line for the zombie treason care votes when push came to shove. But they need to remember this. Especially in light of the various things he's now trying. Now he's using various branches of the executive branch of government to punish senators for their votes. And by the way, there was, of course, another inclusion in the Constitution that probably bears some relevance in all of this. It's meant to have application directly to direct law enforcement action against members of Congress, i.e. arresting them. But the speech and debate clause and other provisions are supposed to protect members of Congress from political retaliation like this, although at an escalated level. But it's also meant to imply that even at lower levels, you just don't start out on this path. But okay. We're not yet threatening the arrests of members of Congress. But recall that even though this would be prohibited to him normally under the Constitution, who knows what sorts of ideas Donald Trump has in his head about pardons and who he can pardon for what, including himself. And once he gets the idea in his head that he can pardon himself of any crime, I don't know that he doesn't start thinking about committing crimes or asking crimes to be committed on his behalf against members of Congress who can't be swayed by the ultra-powerful Interior Department. It is powerful, I'm not kidding, but we don't really think of it as ultra-powerful. But members of his own party need to be aware that they will be under the gun just as much as Democrats, and that one day it may appear that the only way to control this is through impeachment, and they'll say, but I'm a Republican. I don't vote to impeach Republican presidents. And you can remind yourselves, yeah, well, he's a Republican too, and that didn't stop him when it came time to nail you to the wall. So let that sink in. That's all I'm saying. Well, that's not all I'm saying. I have another hour and a half to say things, and part of it is going to be finishing this Alaska Dispatch news story, because it's pretty good. Last month, Nevada Republican Senator Dean Heller, here we are, faced an advertising campaign over his opposition to the health care bill. It's a far cry from being arrested, but it is his first step, not towards being arrested, but just toward his demonstration, Trump's demonstration of his willingness to attack, harm, undermine, and who knows what else, members of his own party to get his way. So last month that happened. There was an advertising campaign against Heller over his opposition to the healthcare bill, run by America First Policies, a nonprofit group that backs Trump's agenda. That's an interesting way of putting it. It is a super PAC stocked with Trump supporters, obviously, and ex-Trump campaign personnel, including the execrable Katrina Pearson, in case you were ever wondering what happened to her. The chief spokespeople, it seems, for this outside group, it's a super PAC, are Katrina Pearson, they're the best known spokespeople, and what's her name? The blonde girl, what's her last name? Is it Laren? I don't know what her last name is, but it begins with an L, and she's grating and annoying, and she got fired from the Glenn Beck group at some point because something, you remember it. I think she was actually pro-choice on abortion, maybe, and that's why she got kicked out. Interesting. What an interesting person she is. Anyway, that's who America First Policies is. They were the ones running the ads against Dean Heller. Trump ultimately suspended the advertising campaign after complaints from Republican senators, but kept up pressure on Heller, even saying at a White House meeting with Republicans, look, he wants to remain a senator, doesn't he? I'm going to have his legs broken. I'm not saying it. Oh. Heller is facing a tough race in 2018. Nevada is a swing state. Murkowski, on the other hand, is not. She won her re-election handily in 2016 and does not face re-election until 2022. So a threat to primary her over the vote means little at this moment. But Trump made it clear he was unhappy with Murkowski's vote Wednesday morning, taking to Twitter to air his unhappiness. Senator Lisa Murkowski of the great state of Alaska really let the Republicans and our country down yesterday. Too bad, Trump wrote. When asked about the tweet in a hallway interview Wednesday morning, Murkowski told an MSNBC reporter that future elections did not weigh into her decision on health care. We're here to govern. We're here to legislate. We're here to represent the people who sent us here, and so every day shouldn't be about campaigning. Every day shouldn't be about winning elections. How about just doing a little bit of governing around here? That's what I'm here for, she said. That's a pretty good answer, really. Murkowski has been at odds with Trump at times, occasionally refuting his more controversial statements. She took a stronger approach toward the end of the presidential campaign, saying she could not support his candidacy and would write in a vote for someone else. That's a pretty clear indication. But Trump hasn't struck back at Murkowski in the past. She's been invited to the White House numerous times, and as a potential swing vote, has repeatedly been seated next to or near the president during negotiations and meetings. It's not clear whether the president offered Murkowski any deal on health care or any threats prior to her vote. And it may take away from this, seat her farther away, and she might appreciate that a little bit more. I mean, maybe that was the problem. Everybody assumed going into this that it would be a great thing. She'll be duly impressed by being seated next to the president. But the president is a disgusting, bloated pussy grabber, so, what are you going to do? That's not really necessarily who you want to seat the women senators next to. I don't know why they thought that was going to be such a great idea. But presumably everyone was supposed to believe that he's beyond his... And I think we can say this on the radio now because we're just quoting the president, but he's beyond his pussy-grabbing days. It is said, but, it's not said. It's just assumed, I guess. It wasn't that long ago on the Access Hollywood tapes. I mean, it's over a decade, and I guess we should take account of that. But if you're 70 years old, getting caught out when you're nearly 60, it's not like he's a kid of 39 like Donald Jr. or anything like that, right? I don't know. I'm not certain that he was able to learn new tricks when he was a young dog. Now that he's an old dog, I really doubt it. Anyway, it's not clear whether there were any other deals or threats issued prior to her vote. Trump has not tweeted about Murkowski in the past and rarely about Alaska. He retweeted a Fox and Friends story earlier this month about a missile defense test off the coast of Alaska. But I'm sure he didn't care that it involved Alaska. It was just cool sounding because it was a missile test. And in 2014, he tweeted about Russian President Vladimir Putin seizing Alaska and a follow-up saying Putin wouldn't want the state because the Environmental Protection Agency would make it impossible for him to drill for oil, which, of course, would be nonsense because I am fairly certain that the Environmental Protection Agency would have no jurisdiction in Russia. But okay, I'm sure he thought he was making a brilliant point at the time. Our president is a mental midget. Anyway, I said that we were going to take a look at the postponed hearing notice on Department of Energy and Department of Interior nominations. I'm just curious. It just the notice simply says that it's been postponed to a date later to be determined, but I don't see any link of any kind to any list of whose nominations were to be considered at that time. You could ferret this out with some good Google foo and see, if you're interested, who's on the nominations calendar for Department of Interior or Department of Energy positions and what states they are from. The Senate nominations calendar is available on their page if you know how to dig for it, and everybody's state is listed in their formal nominations. So it would be pretty easy to find out. It's just not necessarily something we're going to do with our radio time right now. Let's see what other comments might have come in, which could help redirect the show. At this point, Mad Hatter, after groaning about the Zinky joke, says Scaramucci is the mouth of Sauron. If Sauron was an idiot, anyway, that would make for an interesting thing. Oh, that would be a great graphic. I wish I was a Photoshop whiz. I'd be going crazy. I'd be making pictures all the time. But I was commenting totally apropos of nothing, and I mean really, it's not appropriate to discuss at any time. So here I go. I was taking a look at the video from the Ohio rally that I mentioned briefly at the end of yesterday's show. Maybe we should even spend some time on that one. We'll see how this breaks down. But video of him delivering that weird, like, snuff porn fantasy thing about some sort of immigrant predators who were kidnapping beautiful, fantastic-looking, delectable, luscious 15 and 16-year-old girls for whom there will be no refuge anywhere in this country. You can't escape this. All 15 and 16-year-old beautiful, delectable cheerleaders will be kidnapped and tortured to death under my supervision. Whatever. And it occurred to me the other night, as I was reading this crazy thing, like, oh my God, what if this is projection? We're constantly saying everything he says is projection. What if this is too? I'm not saying that he murdered 15 and 16-year-old girls. I'm just saying that he had a perfect place to hide their bodies in the cement foundations of luxury high-rise buildings in the middle of Manhattan, and nobody's going to be able to tear those things apart to look for the bones. But I don't really think that's what happened. I'm just saying it could have happened because I have no proof that it didn't. That's what I'm saying here. Who would accuse the President of the United States of such things? I certainly wouldn't. And the man wasn't the President of the United States at the time he laid those foundations. So, I don't know. You figure it out from here. Anyway, he seems to have a strange interest in this, and it may be projection of any kind. He's got a lot of different modes of projection, from this is what I do, so I assume everybody else does it, to I wish I could do this, and so everybody else must already be doing it, to I saw this on television or in a movie once, and I got confused and thought it was reality. Different kinds of projection. Anyway, he was giving that portion of the speech, which I saw captured on, in a little video loop being circulated on Twitter, and because I was watching it on my phone, the sound didn't come up. There's some weird glitches going on my phone. Anyway, so I watched this thing without sound, and it's the most ridiculous part of the physical methodology of imitating the Trump voice is limiting the movements of your face. I mean, his face is very animated, and it moves a lot, and his mouth moves a lot, but it doesn't move beyond the lips don't part past a certain diameter. There's a very weird animation to his face, and it usually makes me say things like, what is wrong with him? Why is his face so effed up? Is the basic response he usually gets out of me. Watching with the sound off, knowing if he's saying this horrific, atrocious, disgusting story, but watching him make the weird circles with his mouth and bare his lower dentures and draw breath that way through the clenched dentures, and then all of a sudden, every once in a while, the tongue pokes out between the dentures to give that weird guttural lip smack to his speech, and it's just physically disgusting to have to watch. I hate to do this to you in the morning, but maybe you're listening during the podcast during the afternoon. I hate to ruin your afternoon, but I don't know. Too bad. That's what's happening. That's what the show is about. But it's really the most bizarre thing. You should look at it. Any selection will do. But if you happen across this one, I don't know whether this is particularly bad, but then, of course, the people in the audience make it worse as they gasp in horror at this obviously true story, which just happens to also, as somebody said, be something awfully similar to the plotline of the movie Saw. I never saw Saw, and I don't think I ever will, but I don't have a hard time believing that that's the plot. But it just is. He makes this stuff up out of nowhere. It may be that Stephen Miller did, in fact, script this out for him, and it's also very obvious from that particular video loop that he's reading off of the teleprompter. Which, don't even get me started on how he used to make fun of Obama for using a teleprompter, and that meant he was dumb and didn't have a good brain, like Mr. Trump here. But in addition to the weirdness of his mouth hole, and his orange skin, and the fact that he continues to use this fake tanner or sit under lights or something, and I guess he has his eyes protected, which is good practice. But he ends up with that weird raccoon look of pale pastiness around his eyes, and it's really not even pale. It's red and puffy, generally speaking, but the skin is paler than the orange, bronzy thing that he's got going on the rest of his face. And his eyelids are all puffy and red, and he's squinting terribly at the screen because he doesn't want to wear glasses. And he can barely see, and he barely understands what he's reading, and what he's reading doesn't make any sense, even if he's able to recite it accurately. And then the stupid mouth hole thing going on. He just looks like some kind of, I don't know what. He looks like one of those microscopic things that lives in your eyelashes or something. It's a very odd looking face. He's barely human, in my opinion. And then, of course, add to it how horrible the words are that he's uttering at this time. And he looks absolutely ridiculous the way he's squinting and gesticulating too. And I have seen, that's another Scaramucci story. Have you seen the side-by-side comparisons of the hand gestures that the two do, that he's been actually studying, it appears, Trump's hand gestures and imitating the same ones? It might just be a New York thing, or maybe just a New York rich a-hole thing. I don't know, but I think he's literally done that. All right. Yes, sorry, Karen. I didn't mean to ruin your breakfast. She's just commenting, for God's sake, there goes my yogurt. Well, mine too. Oh, I kept my yogurt. What yogurt are you eating? Maybe it's the yogurt. I've been eating this Noosa yogurt, which is sugar sweet like candy, which means I don't like yogurt. And that's true. I like that yogurt. I don't like real yogurt. It's fine yogurt, I'm sure. And it's got all the best ingredients. I shouldn't be insulting this. It's delicious. Maybe I've had the wrong idea about yogurt for all my life. But anyway, look, what can I tell you? They shouldn't argue with me on buying their product. It's very nice. Everybody else is doing the same thing. Everybody's getting sick. Sorry. H.D. Greg has the ew, and Mad Hatter says, oh my God, Trump is an alien from Galaxy Quest. Thinks all TV is reality. That may be true too. Let's see. All right. Well, we'll move on from that. But anyway, he's disgusting, and I can't stand him, and you should see what it looks like when he speaks into the camera. Okay. Speaking of his discussion with the crowd in Ohio, Daniel Dale, once again, he's a great follow. If by some chance, partly, thanks for ruining our lunch over in Europe. It doesn't matter what time of day you listen to this show. You're going to ruin whatever meal you're involved in or about to have. And if you're fasting, then you're just going to get a headache. Oh, why isn't this opening? All right. Well, it's taking its sweet time to open this up. But Daniel Dale had a tweet. I'll give it another try. Maybe we can call it up directly via Twitter here. But he grabbed a portion of, I think, was Time Magazine's transcription of the speech from the Ohio rally event. And maybe I can find my own retweet of it first, since my pocket version of it doesn't really want to open. Yeah, maybe I didn't retweet it. I'll have to just look for his tweet of it. And he's D Dale 8. Daniel Dale is. So let me go this way, the long way around, to trying to find this section. And he just had an interesting comment that went along with it. This no paragraphing Time transcript of Trump's Youngstown speech should go in a museum. And I don't know whether they didn't bother to put paragraph breaks in, or just felt like there was no point in putting paragraph breaks in the way he ad-libs his speeches. And so I get his point. So this is not the portion of the speech in which he tells his snuff fantasy. We may be able to dig that one up later, but this is just an illustration of, well, how much of his speech making is an awful lot like this show. Maybe that's why maybe that's it. Is that we're just too similar. We can't. There's not enough room in the world for both me and Donald Trump, and one of us is going to have to go. And I'm not leaving. I came here to. All right, whatever. Look at this mishmash non-paragraph here. You might as well it just picks up mid-thought, and what difference does it make? Don't even think about it. We will build the wall. Don't even think about it, everybody. We're just going to do it. We will build the wall. Don't even think about it. He says twice. I watched the media as they say, well, he just had some fun during the campaign on the wall. That wasn't fun, folks. We're building that wall. And walls do work, which is interesting because Scaramucci, one of the tweets he just recently had to delete was, walls don't work. The walls do work. They added that line in there for him. Okay. Walls do work, and we're going to have the great people come into our country, but we're not going to put ourselves through the problems we've had for so many years. So the great people will come in, and the not great people will not. One of the more irritating aspects of Donald Trump's rhetoric is that, of course, he has no specifics about anything. But what about all the good people that can't get in because, well, we're going to have the great ones come in, but the non-great ones are not. What are we going to do about healthcare? It's intractable. It's difficult. It's complicated. It's more difficult to grasp than you could possibly understand. We're going to do something great. It's going to be beautiful. Everybody's going to have a wonderful time. You know, and that's enough for his fans. Okay. We're going to build that wall. Walls do work. We're going to have great people come into our country, blah, blah, blah. So then they're cheering. After decades of rebuilding foreign nations, we are finally going to rebuild our nation. And it says the crowd begins to boo at something. It's not the content of the speech. That's not possible. Crowd boos at something. They're pointing to a protester. This is Trump now saying it. Honestly, if you don't point, nobody's even going to know he's here. Weak voice. Weak voice. Don't worry. He doesn't have a microphone. Weak voice. Chants of USA from the crowd. Boy, he's a young one. He's going back home to mommy. Oh, is he in trouble? He is in trouble. He is in trouble. And I'll bet his mommy voted for us, right? Cheers. By the way, so this morning I'm watching Fox News. Crowd cheers. And they had some people on, that's a good description, they had some people on, and these were Democrats that voted for Trump. And they had this on. And so far, if anything, they've gotten more committed. But they had a man on this morning, and they had a man on this morning who was a Democrat his whole life. He voted as a Democrat, but he voted for, I say us, I don't say me. This is just his off-the-cuff stuff is really amazing, and I wish we had recorded it and put it on a golden album and attached it to the Voyager space probe, because by the time they get here, those aliens, and they've seen our chart and they've played our album, because they all are still listening to vinyl type stereos, because whatever, I don't know. What else should we have sent them? They'll figure it out, right? They'll build themselves something that can make sense of this, and they'll hear this, and they'll arrive at Earth, and it'll be during the Trump administration, and they'll say, what happened here? Like, they devolved to this crazy eyebrow mite. What is this guy? I can't understand what he's saying. And so, I don't say us. I don't say me. I say us. We. The wall. It's going to be this guy, his mommy. They had on the guy, this Fox television. I was looking at the box with the little people in it, where they say things, and I repeated, and they had this, man on, and he said these words, and I was like, interesting, because it was, there was an idea, and the man had said it, and it came out of his mouth hole. Like mine. Alright, whatever. He's nuts. I hate him. Moving on to other reasons why I hate him. Thank you, Rebecca, for Noosa, she says, is the best, and she says, try the salted caramel flavor. I made my son sick of the salted caramel flavor very quickly. He likes the vanilla, and he liked the salted caramel, but even that was too sweet even for a 16-year-old. He finally said, just vanilla for me, thank you. I'm done with the salted caramel, but it's good in limited quantities. I tried the Mexican chocolate one, which I think is now illegal in this country. But we're not allowed to bring anything Mexican in because it's not fantastic yogurt. I think it really is, but Mexican chocolate is a very weird flavor. Didn't go for it. Just had some blueberry Noosa this morning. Noosa should be sponsoring this program. I would eat it on the air. I don't know if that would be good for radio, but I would be willing to do it in exchange for money because I grew up in the culture of Trump. I really did. I mean, he was at his peak in the 80s, right? We might as well admit that. All right. So we'll keep this Daniel Dale piece available for those of you listening on the podcast or live, for that matter, to look up and gape at on your own time. Let's see. What other fun things? Oh, yes. Here's something that we ought to note, as Josh Marshall did at Talking Points Memo yesterday. We also sort of barely mentioned, and I don't even know that I'm going to go any further into it except to say it's, par for the course with Trump, ghastly as usual. His announcement unilaterally, and I don't know if this sticks, because who knows if it's something he can do unilaterally, or certainly by pronouncement over Twitter, I don't think is usually a legal mechanism for these things. But the barring from military branches of transgender personnel, I don't even know if you could enforce the thing as written, if you can consider the tweet as having written it out. I don't know what it's supposed to mean. Was it supposed to mean that everybody who's transgender and in the military now should go home? I'm not really sure. And I'm a little bit confused about the status of transgender people inside the military as well. There were a lot of people speaking out yesterday who were transgender veterans, but it appears that we were hearing from people who were in the military in one gender, separated from the military by retirement, of their own volition, and then transitioned afterwards. And although that's an important voice to bring to bear, because obviously they felt that I'm sure they were thinking of transitioning while they were still in the military, and so it has some bearing. But I guess it would be, I guess my question is how many people we're really talking about, just to get some sense of it. I mean, it's the wrong policy to enforce regardless, even if there's just one person. But I was a little bit curious about, are there people who are already transitioned who then joined the military as they're newly, under their new identity? Or are there people who transition during their time in the military? I mean, there's certainly people who want to, and Chelsea Manning, I guess, would be the famous, which is considered to have still been attached to the military during her imprisonment. I guess so. It was a military prison she was in, right? So I guess so. I'm not as familiar with the case as I ought to be. Other people are handling it admirably. But anyway, it was more to the point here. Certainly Josh's point here was about the way it was announced. One, of course, it being over Twitter, and two, the limitations of Twitter and its 140 characters. I don't know whether this was done by design or it just worked out this way. But if you read the tweets that were issued, it came across in two tweets this ban on transgender folks in the military. It began with an introductory tweet that said, after consultation with my generals, again with that, and military experts, please be advised that the United States government will not accept or allow, and then a series of periods, which is an excessive number, such that it can't formally be described as ellipses, but it's certainly supposed to be evocative of ellipses. And then, later on, the tweet that said, I don't remember how he put it exactly, and it's not quoted in here, but that everybody, all the transgender personnel were going to be booted from the military. And I guess maybe one of these other linked articles in Talking Points memo might have embedded the tweet. Yes, this follow-up tweet then, the United States government will not accept or allow, pseudo-ellipses, transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. Our military must be focused on decisive and overwhelming victory and cannot be burdened with the tremendous medical costs and disruption that transgender in the military would entail. Thank you. No punctuation after thank you. I don't know whether he ran out of characters or just forgot the period or exclamation point, which he might have wanted to include at the end of that one. Without getting into the ridiculousness of the reasoning, I was more focused on, as this piece in TPM points out, the fear that this might have engendered, and not it wouldn't at this point have engendered the fear in transgender personnel, but everyone else. And in this case, at the Pentagon. Josh puts it this way: aside from the policy decision itself appearing to expel transgender service members from the U.S. military, how it happened is also quite disturbing. Despite Trump's claim about consulting with, quote, my generals and military experts, the Pentagon didn't seem to have any idea what he was talking about. And as yet, nothing has officially happened, since all the Pentagon has seen is a tweet. But he points out, look at this. The first tweet from the announcement simply says, after consultation with my generals and military experts, please be advised that the United States government will not accept or allow ... and then nothing. And I think he let that tweet hang out there for almost 10 minutes before managing to peck out the follow-up tweet about what this was all about. Here's BuzzFeed's reporting about the reaction to that first tweet at the Pentagon. At the Pentagon, the first of the three tweets raised fears that the president was getting ready to announce strikes on North Korea or some other military action. Many said they were left in suspense for 9 minutes, the time between the first and second tweet. Only after the second tweet did military officials receive the news that the president was announcing a personnel change on Twitter, and not that he was saying the United States government will not accept or allow North Korean aggression to or Cuba to exist, or I don't know, what, who knows what he was going to say. And so therefore he's launching a nuclear strike. What's not clear here, by the way, is whether this is about relatively low-level personnel who wouldn't know about a major attack before it was announced, or more senior-level officers or civilian appointees and civil servants. Obviously, if it's the latter, it raises some pretty serious questions about how out of control or unpredictable President Trump seems to be to the people at the Department of Defense. The fact that top brass were sitting there saying, are we going to war? Is this how he's doing it? Is pretty amazing, and pretty good indication that this guy is really not fit to be president and is going to get us in a lot of trouble. Rebecca, thank you, has this fact: the military spends about $5 million on transgender care. They spend $40 million on Viagra. That's not surprising. It is surprising that they spend any money on it at all, Viagra. But, okay, that's about the ratio that I figured it would come in on. And it's not entirely, I mean, I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about the issue. Do we have any clarity on what that $5 million actually goes toward? And would it necessarily mean that it's spent on military personnel, or could it be their dependents as well? And I don't know. I mean, I guess the issue is spending money on transitioning people who are currently active in the military. But I mean, you know, we spend all sorts of money on health care for people who are currently active in the military. All right, and I'm sure conservatives disagree with the whole notion, and probably there are some people who are not even particularly conservative who also disagree with the whole notion, but I can't get into that division just yet. Seems like a trivial amount of money, but it is being suggested, and I guess there's something more than just a suggestion behind it, that he actually has made this decision for the purpose of targeting and capturing the money previously spent on transgender medical care in the military and somehow trying to convert it into money for his border wall. I don't know exactly how, by what mechanism he actually thinks he's going to accomplish this, but of course, there's just not nearly enough money to make it worth it. I mean, the wall costs considerably more than we're spending on transgender care in the military. And I think it would build a drop in the bucket as far as wall costs go. But I keep seeing that hinted at. I really haven't dived much into the substance behind it because there's just so much else going on. But I don't know if anybody's got a good connection to a well-reported story from a respectable source on that one, or somebody who's terrible at it but links to respectable sources would also be acceptable. At least it would give us a gateway to figuring that story out, and maybe that makes a good Friday story if it really begins to hang together. All right. Other fun issues which ought to be raised at some point. I should probably check in over at the front page of Daily Kos and see what's happening this morning in the Senate. I don't know what time they were convening or whether they worked overnight or what. I didn't even bother to check the schedule because it's just not like any other sort of vote and not like any other sort of legislative process I've ever followed. And you're just going to have to kind of follow it ad hoc at this point. Here's Joan with a very recently posted item on the front page. Trump administration threatens Alaska's energy industry over Murkowski's Trump Care vote. So up to date on that one. And let's see what other. Here's the one about the the personnel issues inside the Department of Defense. Carrie Elveld on this one. Sessions' Justice Department says gays aren't protected. Oh no, it's a different angle here, but it says gays aren't protected from discrimination under federal law, and I guess that's a connected issue, certainly, but that's interesting. Despite their recent rift, Donald Trump and Attorney General Jeff Sessions are in sync on one thing. They hate the gay, so at least they've got that going for them, the two of them. That's not the way Carrie puts it. She says, it's a perfect time to declare open season on LGBTQ Americans. After Trump declared a ban on transgender military service Wednesday morning, Sessions' DOJ followed up that evening by filing a 23-page brief in a Second Circuit appellate case, Zarda versus Altitude Express Incorporated, arguing that discrimination based on sexual orientation is not covered by the prohibition on sex discrimination under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Hi, again, something we could veer off on that path and spend time there, and we really have to, but I want to at least raise the issue because it's much broader than just the military aspect, what's going on in the next couple of days. It might just be, I don't know whether this is part of Sessions trying to save his job by cozying up and hating the gay as much as Donald Trump does. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's out there. Let's see. Just might as well summarize what's on the front page here and see if there's anything that grabs us. Mark Sumner. Scaramucci brings the Trump team the unified message they've been seeking. We're all morons. Congratulations to Anthony on that one. Let's see. The Morning Digest for Daily Kos elections. Mo Brooks complains that Trump has publicly waterboarded Jeff Sessions. How interesting is that? And all the way back. And then that takes us all the way back to early morning with Bill's cheers and jeers for Thursday as well. Okay. Well, I was just making a quick look to see if there were any updates on Senate floor action on the front page, and there don't appear to be. So I'm as much in the dark about what's actually happening this morning as you are. We'll see if, though, there's any more information on what we might expect for the day there or otherwise in the morning headlines and news. Let's just see if we can double check. Top stories continue to be about Scaramucci, though, proving that it's an effective distraction for what's happening on the floor. Let's take a look then over at the Health 202 and see if they've got any information for us here. We'll read the latest and dissect it. Paige Winfield Cunningham with the morning's Health 202. Republicans look to chop off just one of Obamacare's three legs. If you're unfamiliar with that concept, Charles Gaba can explain anything about Obamacare, but he's explained that one beautifully in the past. Brain wrap, for those of you following on Twitter and elsewhere. Obamacare is often referred to as a three-legged stool. Donald Trump is often referred to as a two-legged stool. I just thought I'd throw that one in there for your edification in case you didn't pick up on it as I laughed. Americans must buy health insurance. Insurers must sell them generous benefits without discriminating, and the government provides subsidies to help pay for it all. That's the three legs of the stool. Not that stool, the other stool. Using that metaphor, let's consider how Senate Republicans have struggled to pass an Obamacare repeal bill over the past 2 days. First, Republicans tried to chop off all three legs, with the bill replacing much of the Affordable Care Act. That failed Tuesday night. Then, they tried to chop off just the first and third legs, the individual mandate to have coverage, and the subsidies in a repeal-only bill. That failed yesterday. Now they're down to a third potential option. Chop off just one leg, the individual mandate, and leave the stool lopsided. Number 3 Senate Republican John Thune said yesterday that they're edging closer and closer to 50 votes for this skinny repeal option. That's what they're calling it. Terrible name, but whatever. My colleagues, Juliet Alperin, Kelsey Snell, and Sean Sullivan, report this news from John Thune. Details are still emerging and could always change quickly, but the aim is to pass a bill repealing just the ACA's individual and employer mandates, its medical device tax, and its public health fund. Funding for extra Obamacare subsidies for cost-sharing discounts may be attached too, and the legislation may also retain a provision blocking Medicaid reimbursement from Planned Parenthood clinics. Once passed, this bill could be sent to a conference committee where members of the House and Senate could hash out an agreement. That's kind of where we were yesterday, where we got the notion that the Senate could pass, as Bill, I think rather brilliantly put it, a coffee-stained Chick-fil-A menu and simply say, this is what we're sending, let's conference it out and come up with something else. And this was the ploy that was being used with reluctant senators. Now, there's a lot of danger involved in this, and I think we'll pause in this article at this point and try and explain it, although we'll probably then read the rest of the article and say, oh, it was already explained in the rest of the article. I should have just read on. But usually the explanations are lacking anyway. So I'll flatter myself to think I can give you a better one beforehand. But yesterday during the show, the prevailing thinking was that they could lure reluctant senators across the line to 50 if they said, listen, we have this skinny repeal thing. Well, what is it? Don't worry about it. We want you to vote for it. It's something less than the full repeal that we were talking about before. Well, what is it? How does it work? Listen, I keep saying this. Don't worry about it. Well, what do you mean? How am I supposed to vote for this thing? I don't know what it is. Well, one, we don't know what it is either. How is that a comfort to me? It's not. I'm having both sides of the conversation. I need two voices for this one. One should be Donald Trump and one is David K. Johnston. No. Anyway, look, the reason we want you to vote for this is it doesn't matter what's in it, because what's in it is going to change after you vote for it this first time anyway. To which a senator will say, that comforts me not at all. Why would I be persuaded to do something like that? And the answer is, look, here's how it's going to work. Vote for whatever this stupid thing is. I don't know if it works. I don't know if it doesn't work. The point is, I want 50 votes on something, and we're going to send that something to the House, and the House is going to say, we don't even know what this is. We want to have a conference. And in conference, we'll work it out. Now, not all members of Congress understand what conference is. A lot of them have not. There haven't been any conferences on major legislation since they've been in Congress. A lot of these guys. This really is a practice that fell by the wayside. And so I guess we should explain formally what all this stuff is. Well, we'll do it informally. An informal explanation of what conference is on a formal respect, right? There's disagreement on a single legislative item. It has to be the same bill. In other words, H.R. 123 gets voted on in the House, adopted, sent to the Senate. Senate has to take up H.R. 123 and come up with a different version of it, either by amending it or substituting all the text, however they deal with it. But once it's changed, even one thing gets changed. It's now the Senate, if they pass it, is now in disagreement over some portion of this text with the House. And there are a couple of ways to resolve those differences. One of which is for the House to say, you know what, I like your change. We'll accept it. We vote on the Senate. We vote now on the text of H.R. 123 as amended by the Senate and say yes to it. Done. They can vote to disagree with the changes that the Senate made and propose their own changes and send that back to the Senate and start that process over again and give the Senate a chance to accede to the House's changes or not. Or they can say, we find ourselves in disagreement with the Senate and request a conference. And, there's lots of, formal procedures here. I think the Senate, in anticipation of a conference, can send its initial disagreement with H.R. 123, its initial changed text, back to the House along with a request for conference. And it makes a difference in the process somewhere along the line in the various formalities following. That is to say, who votes on the conference report first is determined by which House requests the conference, I believe. I was going to say it might be that I've seen some explanations, probably, this is why I'm thinking that might make it depend on who agrees to the conference after having been requested by the other House, but that's just another way of stating the same thing, so long as the result comes out the other way. Anyway, it matters who requests the conference and who agrees to it determines, once the agreement is reached, which House votes on the proposed agreement first, but we haven't even gotten to that stage. Okay, so one House request says we're in disagreement and we think there's too much to just work out here with a simple, okay, we'll take your change. We want to suggest some more changes. So they request a conference, and that's a formal vote. You got to have a vote. We find ourselves in disagreement. We request a conference, and further, these are the people we propose to send to the conference on behalf of our House of Congress, whether it's the House of Representatives or the Senate. And the leadership picks who goes, and typically speaking, the leadership of both parties, because you send members of both parties. And the majority party retains its advantage here, and they send more members of the majority party than they send members of the minority party. But there is a minority voice there. It just doesn't get listened to very much. So formally speaking, let's say H.R. 123 is passed by the House. It goes to the Senate. The Senate changes one provision of it, sends it back as H.R. 123. That is crucial. If the Senate simply says, we have our own bill, S456, and it deals with the same subject, exactly the same subject, if the Senate passes H.R. 456 and sends that to the House, there's nothing to conference yet. There has to be a difference on the same legislative vehicle. Now, if the Senate had already been working on H.R. S456 and had gotten so far as to say, well, we don't want our effort wasted here, Sending S456 to the House doesn't do them any good in terms of moving the ball forward quickly. So what they'll sometimes do at that point, if they've already considered and passed S456, is they'll take up H.R. 123 and they'll say, first things first, we're going to amend H.R. 123 by substituting in the text of S456, and then, because we've already voted for it and adopted it, we'll adopt it now, but we'll call it H.R. 123 and send that back to the Senate, to the House. Now we got a conference situation. If they simply say, we've passed S456 and you already have it, can't we just conference on that? The answer is no. It has to be the same legislative bill. Now, I guess at that point, the House could vote, for whatever reason, to take up S456 and substitute for it the text of H.R. 123, and they could go to conference on S456. But there would be no point in doing that. Well, I mean, you could, if for whatever reason the Senate forgot that they had S456, whatever. But normally they don't. So they take the shortest path to conference because they're humans and they have brains. But I don't know what's happening in the Congress these days, so who knows. You get the idea, though? It has to be the same bill number. Even though the text changes, believe it or not, it all hinges on the vehicle number. For whatever reason. And there is a reason. And we could actually explain that if you want. It, too, ends up becoming relevant later on. Despite living in the digital age and knowing that there can be many current copies of current legislation as amended floating around back there, our system was designed prior to the digital age, for one thing, and just it doesn't hurt things in the digital age, by the way, to keep one official copy of what's going on paper so that everybody can be sure in checking their digital copies, do they have the current working version of this bill or not, and did they not miss an update somewhere along the way. And the Congress still operates on this basis of the papers, the actual paper that holds the bill that moves back and forth between houses. You would think at this, like we say, in this modern digital day and age, that when the House passes H.R. 123, let's say they're all in a rush to do this, and they tell the Senate, okay, we're done with H.R. 123, you can take it up now. It is not simply the case that they say, okay, fine, let's get started on our work right away. We want to save every possible second. The Senate immediately takes up H.R. 123. What is it? What does the bill say? So we can have that working copy in front of us, and then they can go online and look it up, and they bring it up, and they say, here it is. What actually has to happen is the papers that bear the writing that constitutes H.R. 123 as passed in the House, they have to engross the bill. They make sure that all changes and amendments are incorporated and everything that's supposed to be in there based on what the House has done officially is in there. And take those papers, engross the bill, give that current updated version. They carry it across to the Senate. It is messaged to the Senate, and then you'll see every once in a while on C-SPAN or C-SPAN 2, proceedings are interrupted by a messenger coming in and being recognized from the chair, Mr. Speaker, if you're in the House, or Mr. President, or Madam President, or whatever, in the Senate, right? I bring to the Senate, I am directed to bring to the Senate a message from the House of Representatives in writing. As of various, they have scripts for it, but I've screwed up that script for it. I'm directed by the Secretary of the Senate to bring to the House of Representatives a message in writing, and it's H.R. 123, and its text as amended, if applicable, in the House, and it's brought over. And now that the Senate is said to be in possession of the papers, they can begin proceedings on H.R. 123. If they change it, that gets messaged back. It's engrossed, again, messaged back to the House. The House, when the Senate messenger will be announced inside the chamber and say what he's there with and announce it, and it's brought to the Speaker's table, and at some point now the House is in possession of the papers, which they can choose to disagree with and then request a conference, and then that request is also accompanied by appointment of members to represent the House in the conference. And all of that is then messaged over to the Senate, which then has to vote on whether or not to agree to go to conference, and if so, they'll then name their conferees on behalf of both parties and message that back to the House, and then everybody has their meeting. And I say it becomes important, not only who requests the conference, but who is in possession of the papers. Those two factors help determine who votes first. In other words, they go to conference, they agree on something, they write up the conference report. The question is, should the conference report go first to the House of Representatives to be voted on, or to the Senate to be voted on? Now, what happens after skipping that part, deciding who gets to go first? What happens with the conference report? Conference report only addresses the area. It's supposed to only address the areas of disagreement, and it's supposed to be a relatively, to borrow the same term, skinny document. Since it doesn't reprint an entire bill, it just talks about, where we're in agreement, we're in agreement. Where we're in disagreement, this is what we're going to do. And so basically a conference report is in section 1058A, where the Senate says $1 billion and the House says $2 billion. It doesn't bother referencing all of that, but it says in section 1258A, insert, $1.7 million. Whatever compromise they agree on. It's just a list of bullet points of places where there was disagreement and what the new agreement is going to be. And then that package, if adopted in both houses, is said to have the effect of amending the then current underlying bill as engrossed in the papers. So you know what you're changing. The engrossed version of the bill last handled by whichever house handed it off before requesting the conference. And this is the list of changes to it. And if you simply apply this list of changes, once it's adopted by both houses, to this underlying engrossed bill, this plus that equals the bill you're going to enroll at the end as the product of bicameral action and send to the president for signature. Got it? So, the possession of the papers and the order in which conference is requested and agreed to, I can't remember what the actual rule is off the top of my head, but that is what determines, after the conference report is written, whether the House or Senate will vote first. And it's basically, the rule is, I guess, whoever requests the conference gets whoever initially requests the conference gets the first vote. I can't remember whether it might be the exact opposite, but that's the basis of it. And I think it may have to do with the fact that, the House that requests the conference has to be in possession of the papers when they do it. Then they send the request to the other house agrees to it. The papers remain with the House making the request, so that now the conference report comes out. The conference report goes first to the House currently in possession of the papers, so that they know what to apply the changes to. That's the basis of the thing. I may have it backwards, that the House that doesn't have the papers that will get it second. I don't remember, but I for some reason I think it's where the papers are determines where the vote goes first. Very rarely an issue, but every once in a while there is some issue, like one house or the other is more or less likely to pass a conference report depending on its contents, and everybody worries, and shouldn't the other one go first? But it's all predetermined based on who sends the request first. But sometimes they anticipate that. For instance, in this healthcare zombie Trump treason whatever care situation, it may be anticipated that the House is the less likely to accept the conference report because of the presence of that crazy House Freedom Caucus and how they may be against anything but full repeal, right? So, do you want the House to vote first and put the whole thing in jeopardy at the very last stage based on the crazies in the House Freedom Caucus? Or do you want to increase the pressure on the House Freedom Caucus to buckle by having the bill's conference report passed first in the Senate, so that it's all up to the House, and you can put the pressure on the House Freedom Caucus guys by saying, look, we got it all the way to this point. This is the very last vote on the whole thing before it goes to the president. Are you going to be the one that makes this thing fail such that the president doesn't get a chance to sign this thing? Now, the House Freedom Caucus guys might relish that. I don't know. But if the thinking is that they'll be embarrassed and possibly get 5 or 10 of them to change their votes and that'll be enough, then you want the Senate to vote first on the conference report, so you engineer it that way. That's where it would make a difference who requests the conference and in what order. So if the Senate were now to take up the House bill, as they've done, and change it as they are trying to do, and if they were able to pass such a change and then report to the House that they had made such a change, you wouldn't then simply send them the papers and let the House decide whether or not to vote on the thing as is or request a conference, because if it's up to them to request the conference, the House will vote first on the conference report, and that's what you don't want. If you want the Senate to vote first on the conference report, and this is all from the Republican perspective, I don't want anybody to vote on this thing. Neither do you. But if the Republicans doing the strategizing say, I'd rather have the Senate vote first on the conference report, then when the Senate finishes its work on this stupid murder bill, they will acknowledge that they are now in disagreement with the House, having amended their bill in some stupid fashion in order to kill more people, whatever, and they will message to the House that they have done that, and that they are in disagreement, and that they request a conference, and will hold on to the papers, and or whatever it is that ends up happening. But they will request the conference first, so that it helps determine who goes first in voting on the conference report. The House gets the message that there's disagreement. If they want to see what those disagreements are and try and work it out, they're going to have to vote to go to conference. And they'll have to do so knowing that once they produce a compromise in conference, if they're capable of doing so, that compromise will go for approval first to the Senate, who will then vote on it, presumably adopt it, and then leave the ball in the House's court. And then they'll be able to say, are you going to stand in the way of a bill that's ready to be signed because the president's pen is in hand, etc.? Or are you going to screw this whole thing up? What? So, that makes a big difference. Now that you know the details of that, we'll try and make it worth your while to explain why you know the details of that. We left off on this point because we were reading the Health 202 by Paige Winfield Cunningham in the Washington Post, and we left off at the introduction of this idea of the skinny repeal option, and that senators were being hoodwinked into possibly voting for this thing because it doesn't matter what's in it, it's going to conference, and we're going to work out something brand new in conference and vote on that. And that has been persuasive to a number of senators who are being convinced to vote for something they otherwise either don't know what it is or wouldn't like it if they did, because they're being told, don't worry about it, it's going to change in conference anyway. And you'll have another opportunity to vote yes or no on whatever it is that comes out of conference. If you don't like it then, you can vote no then. But don't vote no now and prevent us from getting to conference where we might be able to produce something you do like. Okay. The reason all of this is important is because the assumption was yesterday that they were going to vote something out, go to conference, and work something out with the House. And the thinking on that was because, of course, you had all these House Freedom Caucus guys out there, and they were going to have demands, and certainly they would get their way in the House and get this conference. And the House Freedom Caucus would not fail to ask for a conference because they don't believe skinny repeal is full repeal, and it isn't. And they would be angry about that, and they'd want to take one more stab at insisting on full repeal. So here's the thing. Does the Senate, when they amend this bill with the votes, if they are able to do this, with the votes of senators who gave their assent to this stupid idea because they were convinced that there was going to be a conference, what if there's no conference? What if there's no conference? What if they send this thing back to the House and the House says, instead of, yes, we want to have a conference, they say, you know what? This has been a big pain in the ass. We're going to accept this bill as is and put something on the president's desk and call it a victory, rather than give our House Freedom Caucus crazies the opportunity to screw this whole thing up one more time. What if Paul Ryan rides herd
on the Republicans and says, this is it, take it or leave it. I know it's skinny. I know a lot of the senators who voted for it didn't really mean it, but they thought we were going to conference on it. And guess what? I really think we should just pass this thing before the August recess and send it to the president. Does he have the votes to get something like that done? There's a lot of doubt about that because a lot of House Freedom Caucus guys would certainly rebel initially about it. But could they be pressured to say this is better than nothing, and it's better, and nothing is what we're likely to get if we instead vote to go to conference on this thing? Because if we go to conference on this thing, there's just no way. The Senate has made it clear that they're just not going to be able to pass full repeal. There will be members of the House who want to say, let's reverse things. Let's put the pressure on the Senate. Let's pass in the House a conference report that has full repeal in it and then say, all right, senators, your votes are on the line. Are you going to be the ones who stand in the way of sending the president, a Republican president, a full repeal bill after these long years of promising full repeal? It's a tough thing to put senators in that situation, yes, but they're already on record as saying we're against it. So it's also very tough for them to switch positions. It's not impossible, certainly not anything impossible under this administration, but it's very unlikely. And historically, the Senate has simply not responded to that kind of pressure. They've tried it in the past, and the senators say, I gave you my answer last week when I voted no on full repeal. What are you doing sending me this? I'm sorry that this is going to be the end of a long process and we're all going to be embarrassed. But I told you what could pass the Senate. I showed you. I held your hand and guided you through, and we put it on the record. I showed you exactly what would pass the Senate. And you said you wanted more. Well, it's not us that's blocking this opportunity for the president to sign this bill. It's you. You knew what we would and wouldn't accept, and you gave us what we wouldn't. It's a very difficult, it's a touch and go thing, who can win the blame game, but typically, historically, the House has lost the blame game and the Senate has been able to win it. It's just sort of the nature of the relationship between the two houses. So, so what else does this mean in terms of process? If you are a senator who becomes convinced that it's a good idea to vote yes on skinny repeal, not because you like or are even in any fashion in favor of the content of skinny repeal, but because you think it's a vehicle to get to conference, then you need to be conscious when the motions to go to conference come up, or when the bill is finalized and there's final passage, you need to be certain that there's going to be a vote to request a conference made in the Senate, if that's the right mechanism. So you want to do whatever it is. You want to insist on a procedure following final passage of whatever this bill becomes, or whatever becomes this bill, I guess is a better way of saying it. You want to insist on a procedure that has the Senate voting first on the conference report, because otherwise they're going to try and pull this trick, and the Senate conferees are going to need the leverage inside conference to say, listen, we're not getting anything more ambitious than this through the Senate, I promise you. And the Senate is going to vote first. And if this thing is overly ambitious, they're going to vote it down right out of the box. What you don't want is a situation that allows the House to get away with voting first in the conference report, because it's just so likely that they'll insist on showboating and not coming through with something that the Senate will support. Now, there may be, of course, might be the case that the Senate and House all of a sudden become level-headed. The House Freedom Caucus is suddenly populated with level-headed pragmatists who say either that it shouldn't matter which house votes first, or we're willing to vote first, or we're willing to vote second because we'll take whatever you give us, or whatever. They could all change their minds. But it will become important who votes first on the conference report. And I guess more to the point about senators being hoodwinked into voting for skinny repeal because they're relying on conference, if the bill that takes shape out of this stupid process were to pass and Mitch McConnell simply said, that's it, we're done, now the House gets it and they can request a conference or not, then you're immediately in danger of the House deciding, for whatever reason, after hashing it out, that they won't even bother to request a conference. And I don't know that there's a whole lot of leverage once the bill finally passes. There's not much in the way of opportunity that I can think of for a senator who would feel cheated and lied to if there weren't a conference to step in and insist that the Senate make a motion for, they could try and be recognized from the floor and make that motion themselves, but they probably wouldn't even think to do it, and who knows whether they'd even be recognized to do so. If McConnell has already planned to simply let the bill go, let the papers leave the Senate at the end of final passage of whatever they develop in the Senate. You'll have to watch that, and that'll happen. That could happen in the wee hours of the morning after this votorama goes on. We don't know when that will happen, but it's something you ought to watch, and it will affect the dynamics under which the House receives this thing and helps them decide what to do, and opens up the possibility that they may simply say, yeah, you thought there was going to be a conference, but there isn't. You voted for this on the premise that there was going to be a conference, and you would never have voted for it otherwise, but hey, guess what, sucker? We got your vote already. We don't need you anymore. There ain't no conference, and you're not getting a chance to fix this thing. And everybody has to go home and say that they opposed the bill after they voted for the bill, just like poor old John Kerry, and try and figure out a way to get constituents to believe that. They could refer them to this show, but they're not going to listen. But you'll already know. Maybe you can explain it to them at your next cocktail party full of people you hate. All right. Well, how about that? That should give you some interesting perspective for the rapidly approaching weekend. You won't get it much in many other places anyway. Nobody else would waste an hour on this with you on radio time. Okay, let's see. Let's finish up the Health 202 and see if there's any other interesting points of esoterica on which we can launch another hour of the show. Let's see. We had already talked about John Thune being the source for the skinny repeal option. Let's see. And this was what was in it. Remember that the details were still emerging and could change, but it would repeal the individual employer mandates, medical device tax, public health fund, funding for extra Obamacare subsidies for cost-sharing discounts could be attached, and the legislation may also retain a provision blocking Medicaid reimbursements for Planned Parenthood clinics. Once passed, the bill could be sent to a conference committee, remember that, where members of the House and Senate could hash out an agreement. Leaders are betting Republican senators who defected on other votes this week would feel enough pressure at that point to support whatever the final measure looks like, if they get the chance to do that. Kaiser Family Foundation Senior Vice President Larry Levitt noted that it could look very different from skinny repeal. That's another entire storyline. They could, in fact, send this thing to conference after all and come out with something very, very different, including something very, very much worse. Larry Levitt tweeted the following: premium subsidies would protect those eligible with, quote, skinny repeal, but those paying full freight get hosed. Not quite a death spiral. Of course, if skinny repeal is just an effort to get a conference committee, who knows what ultimately comes out of that process? If skinny repeal actually became law, would Republicans support stabilization funding to avoid premium hikes and a CSR appropriation? It would be awfully hard for Republicans and President Trump to avoid completely owning the insurance market if skinny repeal just flat out became law. But if Senate Republicans voted for this skinny repeal today or tomorrow, they'd be backing policy that would undermine the already shaky individual insurance market, resulting in fewer covered Americans and driving up premiums. Here's what's likely to happen under the skinny repeal approach. Without the individual mandate to buy coverage, some people, disproportionately healthy ones, would opt out of health coverage, worsening the risk pools and driving up premiums. According to new Congressional Budget Office estimates released last night by Senate Democrats, 16 million fewer Americans would have health insurance next year compared to current law, and individual market premiums would increase 20% on average, although the proposal would save the government money because fewer people would be enrolling and accessing subsidies. You're talking about cutting off one leg from a three-legged stool. Linda Blumberg, a senior health policy fellow at the Urban Institute, told me. Again, our writer, Paige Cunningham. Keeping the subsidies in place The stool may be able to rest on the stump and not completely fall over, but you are going to see the effects of that by significantly higher premiums. Granted, Obamacare's individual mandate hasn't worked as well as everyone originally thought. Many analysts concluded the penalty for failing to buy coverage is just too small, set at either $695 or 2.5% of one's income, whichever is higher. That's much less than most people would pay in monthly premiums over the course of a year. Plus, the government has few tools for collecting the penalty. It can't garnish people's wages or have them arrested, for example. It can only draw the penalty from a taxpayer's tax refund if they have one. But here's the irony. Republicans say it's essential that they repeal Obamacare because it's destroying the individual insurance market. But this skinny repeal approach wouldn't fix the marketplaces and would probably make them quite a bit worse. Insurers would still be subject to the ACA's sweeping coverage requirements that they offer specific benefits and cover even the sickest, most expensive patients, or guaranteed issue and community rating, right? But without the promise that the healthy must sign up too. The irony gets even deeper when you consider that the bare bones bill would cause premiums to rise, even though Republicans have made lowering premiums a central demand in their quest to repeal the ACA. That's actually why three Senate conservatives, Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, and Marco Rubio, said they opposed a repeal bill that the House passed in 2015. Like the potential skinny repeal for which the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is currently gaining support, the 2015 House bill would have ditched only a few parts of the Affordable Care Act, including its individual and employer mandate, medical device tax, sounds familiar, right? Prevention fund, and a few other provisions. At the time, Cruz, Lee, and Rubio said the House bill didn't go nearly far enough. This simply isn't good enough, the trio said in a joint statement. Each of us campaigned on a promise to fully repeal Obamacare, and a reconciliation bill is still the best way to send such legislation to President Obama's desk. This is 2015. If this bill cannot be amended so that it fully repeals Obamacare pursuant to Senate rules, we cannot support this bill. With millions of Americans now getting health premium increase notices in the mail, we owe our constituents nothing less. Indeed, most Republicans do understand the need for an incentive for people to buy coverage to create a functional insurance market. Both versions of the House and Senate bills to replace the Affordable Care Act contained penalties for those who didn't maintain continuous coverage. Violators would still have to pay higher premiums under the House bill, and they'll have to wait 6 months to enroll under the Senate version, if that survives the birdbath, and it's not entirely clear that it will. And a bill proposed in 2015 by Senators Richard Burr, Orrin Hatch, and Fred Upton, Representative Fred Upton, also required people to maintain continuous coverage if they wanted protection against being denied coverage or being charged higher premiums based on their health status. A group of Senate Republicans, including 27 members still holding office, submitted a brief to the Supreme Court back in 2012 when the Affordable Care Act was being challenged as unconstitutional. In it, they argued that the individual mandate is the heart of the healthcare law, and without it, both the number of uninsured Americans and premiums would skyrocket. And many conservative health policy experts agree repealing only the individual mandate is a crummy idea. Having guaranteed issue and community rating without some sort of mandate is structurally a rather dangerous thing to do. Robert Grabois, I don't know how he pronounces that one, a healthcare scholar at the Mercatus Center. Okay. Anyway, it's an invitation to a death spiral, even conservatives say. As for insurers, they're terrified that Republicans are considering skinny repeal as a possibility. The Blue Cross Blue Shield Association came out yesterday against it, saying it's critical for this healthcare bill to include strong incentives for people to obtain health insurance and keep it year-round. A system that allows people to purchase coverage only when they need it drives up costs for everyone. Democrats, who are mostly standing on the sidelines as Republicans undergo 20 hours of healthcare debate this week, are firing hard at the skinny repeal idea. The House Budget Dems tweeting that the skinny repeal idea leads to bloated premiums for you and your family, and attaching a report that says it would raise average premiums by $1,238, apparently, and then it trails off into ellipses, but you can get the idea that it's a substantial increase. Elizabeth Warren Says skinny repeal should be called gut it and run. Voting to destroy insurance markets and kick millions off healthcare remains immoral. And if the Senate passes skinny repeal, which guts the marketplace, premiums will skyrocket and insurers will quit. Other comments via Twitter, Dick Durbin saying, let's be clear, voting yes on this thing is giving the Freedom Caucus full reign to destroy our healthcare system. That's a good point, too. House Majority Whip Steny Hoyer saying, the Senate has rejected repeal and replace and straight repeal. It's time to work together to improve the Affordable Care Act. That, of course, will fall on deaf ears. But Dick Durbin, I think, going straight to the point that I was making, voting yes on skinny repeal is at best, it's an invitation for Ryan to open a trapdoor under the vast majority of the Freedom Caucus and simply adopt it as is and say, all you suckers who thought there was going to be a conference to improve this piece of crap that will destroy the individual insurance market, we're idiots. We're going to go ahead with it. And guess what? You're going to have to live with it and explain it. At worst, it is an invitation to bring the House Freedom Caucus as the House delegation to the conference, insist on something totally unpalatable, and the whole, from the Republican perspective, the worst thing would be the whole process having gone for naught, or for Republican senators to be faced with a second vote on what amounts to full repeal or much closer to full repeal. That's much worse, that they rejected the first time around, only now they have to vote on it, knowing that they are the last stop before the president's desk, and that pressure could be brought to bear. And who knows what that means, and which departments, executive departments, will call you and say, we're going to kill people in your state if you don't vote for our version of how to kill people in your state. It's going to be very tricky, and it's going to be a hell of a day, and we'll have to keep an eye on it once they begin that process. I did read yesterday that Senate Democrats, and this piece sort of reaffirmed it, Senate Democrats were sort of standing back from the process, and apparently, they were withholding offering any amendments at this point. And they certainly could have done this and offered up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of amendments in the vote-a-rama just to stretch things out. Although I think that they've given up on the idea of stretching things out and trying to get to the point where Mitch McConnell has to decide to go to recess rather than stand around for the final vote. I think just recess is just too far away at this point, and I don't think that they can stretch it to that point. But in addition, Democrats are sort of confounded in even offering up substantive meaningful amendments that they really do want the Senate to ponder judiciously and decide what to do, not just messaging things, but things that they really would like to see change, and maybe even things that they feel might have a chance in a Republican Senate of passing. They're constrained from bringing those amendments because they're not sure which version of the bill they're even amending at this point. And the big rumor, as we've been warning you for some weeks now, is that they could go through all the exercise of amending the bill they want, only to have the very last vote be engineered by Mitch McConnell to be erasing everything that has come before and substituting in, at the last minute, this thing which I wrote secretly and which you now will have no opportunity to amend going forward. There's some confusion, and even I'm still confused about whether or not, if you brought in a complete substitute like that, Democrats would have the opportunity to offer any amendments to it. Yes, the 20 hours would have expired, of course, but it would have expired long before Mitch McConnell even brought his substitute. You'd be in the vote-a-rama at that point. The question is, are any amendments eligible for offering? And I suppose if they've been filed early and have met all the filing deadlines and just have remained on the table and not yet been offered, they might still yet be eligible to be taken from the table and offered to as amendments to whatever it is McConnell slips in at the last minute. It's actually unclear to me whether or not McConnell can trump everything by bringing one big substitute at the end and saying all of your amendments that you had written up earlier, the text of them indicates that they are amending a text that's no longer active as the underlying bill. And though you would be eligible otherwise to have offered an amendment to my text, you would have to change the text of your amendment to indicate which text you are amending in order for it to be a legitimate amendment. But the time limit for filing amendments to be eligible for consideration in the Vote-A-Rama has passed, and you don't have that opportunity available to you. And that's something that they could probably engineer as a ruling and sustain that ruling with a majority vote. And we might find ourselves at the end with an amendment in the nature of a complete substitute being offered by Mitch McConnell, erasing everything that's been done before and with no opportunity to amend it thereafter. And they might even swallow it on the Republican side if they don't adopt along the way any of these other proposals like skinny repeal or repeal and replace or repeal only or whatever. If all that's left to them, if the only thing that they can pass at that point is whatever McConnell offers up, with the hope of going to conference to make it better, they might just bite on that. All right. Well, that's about all that I think I can fit into today's show. I'm fairly certain of this time being sort of linear, and I can monitor its passage by one of these so-called clock devices. We know that we're running up against our time limits here, and that it's about time for us to hand things over to the guys on the after show for them to clean up on all the things we have not been able to pick up for consideration on today's show. In fact, okay, there goes my little alarm, and we'll get ready to make our transition over to the after show after this. Is there anything else that I need to pick up on just to kind of squeeze in there? I think that there are probably a few more, but I don't know if I can get them all. Let me just drop this one for you. I'll read you the headline. I thought this was kind of an interesting bit, and file it in the back of your mind. Sam Thielman, Thielman, over at Talking Points Memo, we called his name the other day, has this interesting tidbit. Trump's conduits for capital from the former Soviet bloc, we all know about that, are actually old pals. What's interesting is who he's talking about here. Old pals. Who are our old pals? Two very different men have been instrumental in introducing financiers and clients from Russia and the former Soviet bloc to the Trump organization's real estate machine. We're talking about Felix Sater. We know about him, plenty about him. And Michael Cohen, the lawyer. Did you know that they knew each other growing up, I guess, in their early teens? They weren't close friends, and each one maintains that they didn't have anything to do with the other one falling into the Trump orbit later in life. But just an interesting note to add to our dot map, and even if we can't make any connective tissue between that and anything else, just seems odd. Seems a little weird and maybe even a little bit hard to believe. Just thought I'd throw that one out there for you to examine on your way into the after show. Next, here on Netroots Radio, let's bring up today's summary. It's Thursday, of course. Thank God it's giovedì. That's Thursday in Italian for you. After the Trump administration filed an extraordinarily rare petition for review, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals temporarily halts the youth climate lawsuit. Interesting. Former Interior Secretary Sally Jewell rips Trump's illegal and unpopular attempt to revoke national monuments, and the president of the Boy Scouts, how about this, has 85 billion reasons to excuse Trump's wildly inappropriate Trump-Jugend Jamboree speech. We'll find out more about that. Plus, of course, Chris Reeves making up for his miss on Tuesday on the second
From
half.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Of course, they call it the last half on the show. Again, it's Chris Reeves, a.k.a. Tom Servo 433, for a discussion on Donald Trump donating his second quarter salary of $100,000 to the Department of Education after proposals to cut over $9 billion for the department. He's got a long way to go on that one. That and much more coming up on the after show next.